am not by nature a confrontational person. I say this not as a disclaimer, but as a fact about myself that I have verified over 49 years of living among other human beings in various configurations of proximity. I do not raise my voice in arguments. I do not send angry emails. I do not knock on people's doors to register complaints about things that are, in the grand scheme of a life, minor. I have a high threshold for annoyance and a genuine preference for quiet resolution over public dispute, and I have lived by both of those things long enough that they are not preferences anymore. They are just who I am. But I also believe with the same depth of conviction that a person's driveway is their driveway, not a community resource, not a shared access corridor, not a convenient shortcut that belongs to whoever finds it convenient. A driveway is private property, purchased with the house, maintained by the owner, and subject to exactly one permission structure, the owner's. If the owner says you may use it, you may use it. If the owner has said nothing, if there has been no conversation, no agreement, no nod across the fence or handshake in the driveway, then the answer is no by default, and the person who uses it anyway has made a decision about someone else's property that was not theirs to make. My name is Walter Sims. I am 49 years old. I'm a high school history teacher at Carver County High School, where I have taught American history and government for 21 years, and where I have spent a significant portion of those 21 years trying to help young people understand that rights and responsibilities exist together, that the freedom to do a thing and the right to do a thing are not the same, and that the structures we build, legal, social, physical, are the externalized agreements we make about how we are going to treat each other. I teach this every year. I believe it every year. And I believed it on the morning I stood in my driveway looking at Rhonda Kaufman's Lexus, parked where my truck was supposed to be. I live in Maple Creek Estates in Carteret County, North Carolina, which is a coastal county with the particular character of coastal communities. Slightly relaxed, mostly pleasant, occasionally disrupted by weather and occasionally disrupted by people who have decided that the pleasantness of the surroundings licenses a certain casualness about everyone else's property. Maple Creek Estates is a 60-home HOA development built on the inland side of the county, away from the water, which means the lots are larger and the prices more reasonable, and the residents are a mix of year-round families and people who have retired here from somewhere colder and more expensive. My driveway is notable in one specific way that is relevant to this story. It is a corner lot driveway, which means it is wider than a standard single-home driveway. It accommodates two vehicles side by side with space remaining, and it connects to both the street in front of my house and the side street along the corner of my lot. It is a through-drive configuration, which means you can enter from one street and exit onto the other without reversing, which I designed and poured myself 7 years ago when I replaced the original asphalt with stamped concrete because I wanted it done right, and I had the time that summer to do it right. It is my driveway. I designed it, I paid for it, I maintain it, and I have in 7 years never once indicated to anyone that it was available for public or neighborhood transit. Rhonda Kaufman lived 3 houses down on the same side of the street, and she had a driveway situation of her own. Her driveway was standard configuration, single entry from the front street, 1 car width, positioned at an angle relative to her garage that made certain turning radii somewhat awkward when the street was busy or when vehicles were parked nearby. This was not an unusual configuration in Maple Creek Estates, and it did not, by any reasonable measure, constitute a hardship that entitled her to use anyone else's property. But Rhonda had a specific way of assessing situations that started from her own inconvenience and worked outward from there. And somewhere in that assessment process, she had apparently determined that my through-drive configuration was the solution to her turning radius problem. The first time I noticed her using my driveway was on a Wednesday morning in October 2 years ago. I had come outside to get in my truck, and I saw Rhonda's white Lexus pulling slowly through, entering from the side street, crossing the full diagonal of my driveway, and exiting onto the front street. She was on her phone. She did not look in my direction, which may mean she did not see me or may mean she saw me and had decided not to engage. I stood in my driveway and watched the Lexus pull away and thought, That happened. I did not immediately do anything. This is consistent with my general approach to first-time occurrences of things that might be accidental. People make turns into wrong driveways. People mistake their neighbors' driveways for shared lanes. One instance of a thing is data, but not necessarily a pattern, and I am a historian by training, which means I am specifically educated to distinguish between a data point and a trend. The following Monday it happened again. Rhonda's Lexus, same route, same unhurried crossing of my full driveway from side street to front street, this time without the phone. She was simply driving through the way you drive through a space you have decided is available to you. I was at my front window and I watched the full transit. It took approximately 45 seconds. She did not pause at the entry point to see if anyone was coming. She did not approach the driveway carefully as someone entering an unfamiliar space would. She drove through it the way you drive through your own driveway, which is to say, with the complete ease of someone who has done this enough times that it no longer requires attention. That told me the 2 times I had seen it were not the first 2 times it had happened. I spent the next week paying attention. I altered my morning routine slightly. I worked at my kitchen table in the early morning rather than in my upstairs office, which gave me a view of the driveway, and I noted what I saw. Over 7 days, I documented 5 additional uses of my driveway by Rhonda's Lexus. Always the same route, always the same direction, side street entry, front street exit. Always the same relaxed, habitual quality that said this was a regular practice rather than a navigational error. 7 documented transits in 7 days. Whatever this was, it was not accidental. I knocked on Rhonda's door that Saturday afternoon. She answered in the way of someone who had been expecting a delivery and was mildly surprised to see a person instead. She was pleasant when she answered. Rhonda was generally pleasant in the way that people are pleasant when they believe the social situation is under their management, and she said hello and asked what she could do for me. I said I had noticed her driving through my driveway on several occasions this week and wanted to let her know that my driveway was private property and not a through route. I said it as simply and directly as I knew how to say it, without heat, without accusation in my voice. She said, "Oh, I hope you don't mind. It's just so much easier than the turn from the street when there are cars parked." I said I did mind, actually, which was why I had come to say something. She looked at me for a moment with the expression of someone processing an unexpected obstacle. Then she said, "Well, I've been doing it for months, and no one's ever said anything." I said that was because no one had known to say anything until recently, and that the fact of having done something undiscovered for months did not constitute permission. She said she would try to remember not to do it. I said I appreciated that. I went home. She drove through my driveway 4 days later. I stood at my kitchen window and watched the Lexus complete its familiar arc across my stamped concrete and exit onto the front street, and I thought about that phrase she had used. I've been doing it for months, and no one said anything. I thought about what that phrase revealed, which was not just that she had been doing it for months, but that she had been aware she might need permission for it, and had decided that the absence of explicit objection was equivalent to consent. She had made a calculation. No one has stopped me, therefore no one will stop me, therefore I may continue. It was a logic that dispensed with the requirement of actually asking. I went upstairs to my office and sat at my desk and thought about what I was going to do. I want to be clear that what I eventually did was not planned as a punishment. I want to be clear because I have told this story to few people and the word they always reach for is revenge, and I do not think revenge is the right word. Revenge requires that I wanted Rhonda to suffer. What I wanted was considerably simpler. I wanted my driveway to stop being used as Rhonda Kaufman's private through route. If she would stop using it voluntarily, I would have preferred that. If she would not stop voluntarily, I needed a way to make stopping unavoidable. Those are different things from wanting someone to suffer, and the distinction matters to me. I also thought, in the particular way that a history teacher thinks about things, about what the correct sequence of escalation was. I had spoken to her directly. She had agreed to stop and then not stopped. The next step in any reasonable system of dispute resolution is documentation and formal notification. I needed to go on record. I sent Rhonda a letter, not an email, a letter, printed on paper, mailed to her address with a return address on the envelope, so there was a physical record of the communication. The letter was 2 paragraphs. The first paragraph said that on a specific date, I had spoken to her at her door about the unauthorized use of my private driveway, that she had acknowledged the conversation and indicated she would stop, and that I had subsequently observed her using the driveway again on a specific date. The second paragraph said I was formally requesting that she cease using my driveway, that my driveway was private property subject to no easement or common use provision, and that continued unauthorized use would require me to pursue formal remedies. I kept a copy. I also called the HOA's management company, a firm called Coastal Property Group, and spoke to a coordinator named Ellen Tran. I described the situation. Ellen said the HOA's covenants were clear, that driveways were private property, and that the HOA had no provision for neighbor-to-neighbor driveway use agreements. Any such agreement would have to be between the homeowners directly, and in the absence of an agreement, a driveway was exclusively the owner's. She said she would note the complaint in the HOA's contact log, which created an official record, and that if the situation continued, she would have a board member reach out to Rhonda. I said I appreciated that. 3 more weeks passed. During those 3 weeks, Rhonda used my driveway 11 additional times. I documented every instance, date, time, direction of travel, in a notebook I kept in my kitchen. The letter had not changed anything. The conversation had not changed anything. Rhonda Kaufman had assessed the situation and concluded, apparently, that my formal request carried no more actual consequence than my verbal one had, and that she would continue until something more concrete than a letter made her stop. I thought about more concrete. I thought about it for several days. I thought about it the way I think about problems I am going to solve rather than problems I am going to escalate, which is to say, I was not thinking about what authority I could bring to bear from outside, but about what I could do myself, within my own rights, on my own property, to produce the outcome I needed. My driveway was my property. I could park vehicles on it. I could place objects on it. I could use it however I chose, within the general provisions about not creating public hazards. There was nothing in the HOA covenants or county ordinances that prohibited a homeowner from parking their own vehicles in their own driveway. My truck was a full-sized F-250. When parked at a specific angle across the entry point of my side street driveway access, which I determined by parking it there one afternoon and measuring, it blocked the entry completely. A Lexus could not pass on either side. The gap between the truck's front bumper and my side fence was 14 inches, and the gap between the rear bumper and the edge of the property line was 11 inches, 25 inches total clearance. The Lexus was 73 inches wide. The math was not in Rhonda's favor. But the truck was my daily driver. I could not leave it parked across the entry point permanently. I needed to use my truck. So the question was not whether the truck would work as a block, but when. The answer came to me one evening in November when my sister called to ask if I would come up to Raleigh for Thanksgiving. She was hosting, she said, and it would be nice if I came a few days early to help with the preparations because she was doing it alone this year and could use an extra set of hands. I said I would be happy to come Wednesday morning and stay through Sunday. She said perfect. I said I would drive up Wednesday. I thought about that for a while after I hung up. 4 days, Wednesday morning through Sunday. My truck would be in Raleigh for 4 days, which meant my driveway would have room in it, which meant Rhonda would very likely use it in my absence, which meant that when I returned Sunday evening, my driveway might have a Lexus in it that had been parked there at some point during the 4 days and had not had a convenient exit window. I thought, or it might not, because the Lexus is not parked there permanently, she drives through and exits. And then I thought about the gate. I had a gate. I had installed it myself 3 years ago on the side street entry of the driveway, a heavy-duty galvanized steel swing gate, 8 feet wide, mounted on posts set in concrete footings, with a hasp lock that accepted a padlock. I had put it in originally to secure the driveway when I left for extended periods, because my corner lot was accessible from 2 streets, and I had had a situation with teenagers using the driveway as a shortcut when I was away. The gate swung inward into my property, and when closed and locked, nothing could enter or exit from the side street. I had not been using the gate regularly. I had left it open for most of the past year, which was how Rhonda had been entering. I had not thought about the gate in the context of Rhonda's situation because I had been focused on the verbal and written approaches. But standing in my kitchen that evening, I thought about the gate with a specific and complete attention. If Rhonda entered from the side street while the gate was open, and if I locked the gate after she entered, but before she exited, she would be in my driveway with no exit from the side street. She could exit from the front street side, which had no gate, but exiting from the front street would require driving backward across the full diagonal of my driveway, which was a tight and inconvenient maneuver in a space she had not designed for reverse navigation. Or she could call me and ask me to unlock the gate. Either way, the use of my driveway would no longer be invisible and without consequence. I thought about this for 2 days. I called Ellen Tran at Coastal Property Group and described what I was considering. She said, from the HOA's perspective, a homeowner locking their own gate on their own property was fully within their rights and the HOA had no position on it. I called a property attorney named Bruce Calloway, who I had used for a real estate matter when I bought the house, and described the scenario. He said the key question was whether any vehicle on my property without permission could be considered in any way held against the owner's will by my locking the gate. He said in a scenario where the vehicle's entry was unauthorized and the exit via the front street remained available, the answer was no. The vehicle's operator had alternative egress and was not trapped, merely inconvenienced. He said, "Walter, you're not imprisoning the car. You're removing the convenience that made the trespass attractive." I said that was exactly right. He said, "Go ahead." The Tuesday before Thanksgiving, I made sure the gate was open at its usual angle. I drove to school, taught my classes, and came home that afternoon. I monitored the driveway from my kitchen window in the early evening. At 6:48, Rhonda's Lexus entered from the side street. I watched it cross the diagonal of my driveway. I put on my coat and my shoes. I walked outside. The Lexus had just cleared the front street exit and pulled onto the road. I walked to the side street gate and swung it closed and locked it with the padlock I had brought outside in my coat pocket. I tested the lock. It held. I walked back inside. Wednesday morning, I drove to Raleigh. I want to be precise about what happened next and about how I know what happened next. What happened next, I reconstructed from 3 sources. A text message conversation with my neighbor Bernard Osai. No relation to the Bernard Osai from another story. It is simply a name that exists in the world, who lived across the side street and had a window view of my driveway's side entry. From a voicemail Rhonda Kaufman left on my cell phone at 11:47 on Thursday morning, and from a conversation I had with the Maple Creek Estates HOA board president, a man named Dale Hutchins, when I returned Sunday evening. Here is what happened. Rhonda Kaufman drove through my driveway on Thursday morning at 11:32. She entered from the side street because the side gate was closed and locked, and she came in from the front street instead, the open end. Bernard Osai observed this from his window and texted me. She came in from the front this time. She had apparently noticed the closed gate on the side and adapted her entry point without concluding that anything fundamental had changed. She crossed the driveway diagonally in the direction she always crossed it, front street to side street, and arrived at the side gate. Bernard Osai's text arrived at 11:39. It said, "She's sitting in your driveway, gate's locked, she's just sitting there." I was in Raleigh at my sister's kitchen table helping peel sweet potatoes for the next day's Thanksgiving preparations. I read the text and put my phone back on the table and picked up the next sweet potato. My sister Patricia, who knows me well enough to read my face, said, "What?" I said, "Nothing, neighbor situation." She said, "The driveway thing." I had mentioned it to her in September. I said yes. She said, "Did it work?" I said it appeared to be working. She said, "Good," and handed me the peeler. At 11:47, Rhonda Kaufman called my cell phone. I let it go to voicemail. She called again at 11:52. I let that go to voicemail also. At 12:04, she called a third time. I noted the time and let it go to voicemail. I waited until 12:30, and then I listened to all 3 voicemails together. The first voicemail was brisk and somewhat confused. She said she had pulled into my driveway and the side gate was locked, and she wanted me to come open it or tell her where the key was. The second voicemail was less brisk and somewhat less confused. The confusion had clarified into something closer to understanding, and the understanding had produced a tone that was approximately 60% annoyed and 40% the specific frequency of someone who suspects they have miscalculated. She said she couldn't get out from the side street and needed me to come unlock the gate. The third voicemail was the most interesting of the three. She said she had tried to reverse out to the front street, but the turning radius from where she had parked made the reverse maneuver difficult, and she had almost touched my fence and had stopped. She said this in a voice that had abandoned most of the preceding tones and settled into something flatter and more direct. She said she needed to leave, and the gate needed to be unlocked. I called her back at 12:35. She answered on the first ring. Before I could say anything, she said, "Your gate is locked and I'm stuck in your driveway." I said I was aware of that. I said I was in Raleigh for Thanksgiving and would not be back until Sunday evening. She said, "You need to come back and open the gate." I said I was not going to drive 2.5 hours back from Raleigh to open a gate on my property for a person who had been using that property without permission for several months. I said, "Rhonda, you can exit from the front street. That entrance is open." She said the reverse maneuver was difficult. I said the forward direction exit from the side street had always been the route she used, and that it was not available at the moment because I had closed and locked my gate, which I was entitled to do on my own property. I said the front street exit was fully open and passable. I said if you drive forward to the front street opening, you can exit from there without reversing. She said, "That's not how I go." I said I understood that, and that the reason it was not how she went was that she had been using my driveway as a through route without permission, and that the gate being locked was what changed when the property owner decided to secure their property. There was a silence. She said, "Walter, this is ridiculous." I said I agreed. I had found the whole situation ridiculous since I had noticed her using my driveway in October and had spoken to her at her door, and she had agreed to stop and then not stopped. I said I had sent a letter. I said the letter had not changed anything. I said I had documented 11 additional uses of my driveway after the letter and had contacted the HOA. I said I was a patient man, and I had been patient for several months, and the gate being closed was what patient had finally produced. She said I could call the police. I said she was welcome to call the police, and that when the police arrived, they would observe that her vehicle had entered my private property through an open entry point, that the property owner had the right to lock any gate on their property at any time, that an alternative egress existed and was passable, and that the homeowner was in Raleigh. I said, "Rhonda, the police are not going to make me drive back from Raleigh to open a gate for someone who has been trespassing on my property for months." I said this without heat and without satisfaction, just as a factual description of what was likely to happen. She did not call the police. What she did, and I know this from Bernard Osei, who texted me updates with the combination of concern and investment that a good neighbor brings to these situations, was spend approximately 45 minutes in my driveway working out the geometry of a front street exit. The driveway was large enough to accommodate it. It required a specific sequence of forward and backward movements to reposition the Lexus from its diagonal parked position to an angle that would allow a clean exit from the front street opening. Bernard described it, across a series of texts, as a lot of back and forth, and I think she's almost got it, and finally, she's out. I received that last text at 1:38 in the afternoon. I put my phone away and went back to the sweet potatoes. I was in Raleigh through Sunday. My sister made an extraordinary Thanksgiving dinner, and I helped with everything I was asked to help with and ate too much and sat by the fire in her living room on Friday evening and felt, in a specific and settled way, like a man who has done what was necessary and is now having Thanksgiving. On Saturday night, my nephew Marcus, who is 15 and who has the particular quality of 15-year-old boys of being simultaneously completely obvious and completely unaware of being obvious, asked me what I was thinking about. I said I was thinking about a situation that had been going on for a while and had recently become simpler. He said, "Did you win?" I said that was not quite the right frame. He said, "But you feel like you won." I said I felt like something that needed to stop had stopped. He considered this for a moment and said, "That sounds like winning." I did not disagree. I drove home Sunday evening and arrived at 7:40. My driveway was empty. The side gate was still locked. I unlocked it, pulled my truck in, and went inside. On my kitchen table was an envelope that had been slipped through my mail slot. I opened it. It was a handwritten note from Rhonda Kaufman. It said, "Walter, I have spoken to my attorney and I understand that I have been using your driveway without permission and that I should not have continued after you asked me to stop. I will not use your driveway again. I apologize for the inconvenience." It was signed with her name, no other content, clean and direct and sufficient. I put the note in the documentation folder I had been keeping since October. I made dinner. I went to bed. I called Ellen Tran at Coastal Property Group the next morning and told her the situation had been resolved and thanked her for noting the complaint in the HOA records. She said she was glad to hear it. She said, "Can I ask what resolved it?" I told her I had locked my gate. She was quiet for a moment and then said, "That works." I said yes, it did. Dale Hutchins, the HOA board president, had called me Sunday evening just before I got home, and I had seen the missed call and called him back Monday morning. He said he had received a call from Rhonda Friday morning, while I was still in Raleigh, reporting that her car had been trapped in my driveway by a locked gate. I said her car had been in my driveway without permission and had had access to an open egress from the front street. Dale said he understood that and had told Rhonda that the HOA had no authority over a homeowner's decision to lock their own gate on their own property. He said she had then asked if the HOA could require me to open the gate. He said he had told her no. He said she had asked if the HOA could require me to leave my gate open in general. He said he had told her that was also a no, and that the relevant provision of the covenants was quite clear that driveways were private property and that no resident had any right to use another resident's driveway without explicit permission. He paused for a moment and said, "Walter, I have to tell you I have been board president for 3 years and this is a new one." I said I imagined it was. He said, "The woman has been using your driveway for almost a year." I said closer to 8 months from what I could document and probably longer before I noticed. He said, "And she thought locking your own gate was the unreasonable part." I said that had been my impression too. He said, "Well, it's resolved now, I suppose." I said it was. What followed was the most ordinary thing in the world, which is nothing. Rhonda Kaufman stopped using my driveway. I say this with the confidence of a man who had been monitoring his driveway since October and continued to monitor it for the following 3 months in the way that you continue to check a repaired thing until you are certain the repair has held. It held. The Lexus never appeared in my driveway again. Rhonda continued to live 3 houses down. She continued to drive past my property on her way in and out of the neighborhood. When we passed each other on the street, she gave the specific nod of someone who has made a private recalibration and is now navigating the relationship within its corrected parameters. I nodded back in the same spirit. We were not friends and we were not enemies. We were neighbors who had arrived at a clear understanding of where one person's property ended and another's began, and that understanding had been bought at the cost of one Thanksgiving afternoon in a corner driveway with a locked gate, which I thought was actually quite a reasonable price. The gate stays closed now when I am not home. It is a small change to my routine. I unlock it when I leave in the morning and lock it when I return in the evening, or I leave it closed entirely on days I am not going out. It takes approximately 4 seconds. I do not think about it beyond those 4 seconds. The stamped concrete I poured 7 years ago is still level and clean and unblemished, which is how stamped concrete looks when it is maintained properly and not subjected to daily unauthorized traffic from vehicles whose owners have decided that maintenance is someone else's problem. I have been teaching American history and government for 21 years. One of the things I return to every year, in different contexts, different eras, different case studies, is the question of what happens when rights go unenforced. What happens when someone with a right to something does not exercise that right? The answer, in history and in a Maple Creek Estates driveway, is usually the same. Other people fill the space. Not necessarily out of malice, Rhonda Kaufman was not, I think, a malicious person. She was a person who had identified a convenient thing and had proceeded to use it until someone made the using of it inconvenient. That is a human tendency rather than a character flaw, and it is precisely why rights require active exercise rather than passive possession. I did not need a lawyer, ultimately, though I was prepared to use one. I did not need the police, though I was prepared to involve them. I needed a padlock and a gate I had already built, and a Thanksgiving trip to Raleigh that was happening regardless. The inconvenience was mine only in that I had to make a brief phone call from my sister's kitchen while peeling sweet potatoes, which was, all things considered, the least inconvenient resolution I could have hoped for. Marcus, my nephew, texted me the following Monday. He said, "Did the situation stay simpler?" I said yes. He sent back a thumbs up and then a trophy emoji and then a message that said, "Knew it." He is 15. He is not entirely wrong. But I told him the trophy was not really the point, that the point was the driveway was mine again in the sense that mattered, which is not the legal sense. It was always legally mine, but the practical sense, the sense where what is yours is actually yours in your daily life rather than just on a piece of paper. He said, "Yeah, but you still kind of won." I said, "Okay, Marcus." He said, "Welcome," and went back to whatever 15-year-olds do on Monday afternoons. I unlocked my gate the next morning, taught my classes, came home, and locked it again. Same as every day since. Thumbnail text, asterisk. She parked in my drive. I left for 5 days.